Hey, what is going on, guys? Thank you so much for joining me today on Vicious Whispers with Mark Tullius. That's right, that's me, your favorite author. Hopefully, or one of them. Yeah, I'm not my favorite author, but hopefully I'm yours. Anyhow, I've been gone for a couple weeks because I have been dealing with a lot of shit, just as I'm sure you are. What I've been going through is all this research for traumatic brain injuries. Pretty deep stuff. Pretty emotional stuff. I recently talked with one of a former sparring partner of mine when I was a professional boxer. Actually fought against a guy. We were sparring partners, and then both of our opponents backed out for my second pro fight. I'm not sure how many he had, and so we fought each other. He won the 4-round decision, but we remained friends. Hadn't talked to him in a long time, but he saw I was doing research on the brain, and he called me up and was telling me all his problems. And so talking to all these guys that I have caused brain damage to and had it inflicted on myself, I don't know, it hits me on another level. So I am taking a good look at my brain, my symptoms. I'm actually writing the book right now. I'm on chapter 5, and yeah, this is a little bit different. With Unlocking the Cage, I pretty much did all the research first, then I went back and started writing the book. But this one's different. I'm writing it as I'm going along. There's been probably a year or two where I've been trying out different things and researching a little bit into brain damage, but now I'm really going full force with it. But yeah, it's definitely taxing. I've found before when I write my fiction that I sometimes I'll fall into the character, I'll get pretty deep, and then whatever I'm researching for the book might affect me in a negative way. I know in Brightside, I looked at a lot of police brutality and shit like that, and so that was really tough. 25 Perfect Days looked at a lot of religious wrongdoing and government oppression and stuff like that. That was rough. It always kind of put me into a negative place. I think I've gotten better with that, but with this nonfiction, it is definitely a whole other beast. So I just shared this the other day because I'm now in the process of, I just wrote my first nonfiction proposal, and I think it sounds pretty good. I think I'm very highly qualified to write this book, and the goal with this one is to find a really good agent, find a big publisher, and go that route. I've been independent this whole time. The last 7 years, it's been rough. I enjoy the freedom. I enjoy being able to write whatever the hell I want with whoever I want. Really no limits, but it's also very limiting, and it just, man, I don't have time to do everything. So with this one, I want to go the traditional route, and so I just sent off my first proposal to an agent, and we're waiting to see. I have my wish list. She was number 1. She's also from Brown, so hopefully that will be enough to get me in. So I will keep you guys posted on that. The good thing is that there's a lot of agents that I'm interested in that I think would be great. So while I'm writing the book, if this first one doesn't take, then the next one. And worst case scenario is I write the book and then I publish it myself, and it'll do well, especially by then. I think it's probably another year in research and writing. But yeah, so it's exciting. And in the meantime, I also have other stuff that should be coming out soon. I know I keep saying that, but we still have Unlocking the Cage audiobook should be out soon. Just making changes on names. My narrator's been having a lot of problems. Really busy with moving, family stuff, everything else. And so that's been on hold. Also need to record Try Not to Die in Brightside. Need to release Try Not to Die in Brightside. That's completely finished. And then also still need to do the final edit on the Untold Mayhem and do some artwork for that. Right now the covers are being designed for those. Actually, Brightside, Try Not to Die in Brightside's already finished. But Untold Mayhem, my buddy Jeff Campbell, who did Messiah right behind me, awesome illustration. He's doing that one as well. And we're also redoing the original Brightside one. I also have Jeff doing that. He's a great artist, so that'd be kind of cool to have him doing my stuff from now on. So that's on the fiction side. I put a pause to Beyond Brightside. Made it through my first draft, just letting it marinate, having my editor go through it now, seeing what we can add, take away, all that kind of stuff before I jump back in. Gives me time to focus on this brain stuff. not only the writing of it, but the actual appointments and everything else. I'm in the middle of neurofeedback, which has been awesome. I've been going to Vital Head and Spine in Pasadena. It's a drive, which sucks, but I feel it's well worth it. So I am on my second or third week of that. I have my brain mapped. Maybe next week I'll share my results. You can see just how fucked up I am. And no, it's not bad. I'm excited about it. Like, I definitely have issues, but I believe they can be corrected. So that's one thing I'm excited about. I got a message of hope for all these other people that have had traumatic brain injuries, whether through fighting, football, shit, bump of the head. Doesn't take much. Car accident. And most of these people don't realize that they have it. So that's why I'm excited about writing this book. So hopefully it will bring attention to it, make people take a look at themselves and whether or not they have a traumatic brain injury. Maybe they have some of these same symptoms. And so, I don't know. I think a lot of people just ignore shit, say that's their normal. And, but no, I was like, I don't have time for that. I want to make sure I'm good. Okay, so like I was starting to say, the other day I shared this on like Facebook. I recorded the prologue, and just so people get an idea of what I'm working on, where I'm at. And I think this is the best way to go about it. So I'll share it with you guys. Hopefully I will not cry like a little girl. Not that little girls cry. Little boys cry too. My son cries all the time. I cry. But the other day while trying to read this, every time I try to read this, I generally cry. It was written, let's see, July 13th. So not that long ago. What is that, 2 months? Not even 2 months, like 6 weeks. But what's awesome is the change already between now and that episode that you're going to hear right now, from 6 weeks ago. So don't be concerned. I'm cool. But this is the start of the book as of now. Obviously, there's a rough draft. Entire book needs to be written. With my fiction, I generally say, you don't know the first chapter until you've gotten to the end. So we'll see. This might change, but here's what we got right now. Hopefully you guys enjoy it and can understand me a little bit better. Prologue, July 13th, 2019. I should never own a gun again. That's what I just wrote down before I rationalized it away. It's a scary thought. Not the kind I should be having on a Saturday night after sitting front row for the subversive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament that my 10th Planet teammates dominated. I'd been tempted to use cannabis before the show, but I stayed sober intentionally, aware I was in a bad funk that needed to be examined instead of buried in smoke. My anxiety is generally high around crowds, and loud music only amplifies it. My wife was understanding and helped me deal at the venue, and while I did enjoy the matches, the downtime in between them was where I realized there was a problem. Everyone else was talking and having a good time, and I was sitting there on the verge of tears, unable to explain what the fuck I was experiencing. That's not crying. That's me clearing my throat. Just so you know. Now, safe at home, waiting for my vaporizer to warm up. I understand part of the problem is depression. I've not been able to train much the past 2 years due to neck, back, and shoulder issues. Jiu-Jitsu has been a big part of my life and it sucks not being able to train. Yet it goes even deeper than that. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking of Junior Seau and Andre Waters blowing themselves away. I ponder Aaron Hernandez and his ravaged brain, convicted of the murder of a friend. I'm thinking of Gary Goodrich and my numerous MMA and boxing friends dealing with varying degrees of brain damage. I consider my Brown University teammates who are in brain studies, one of whom I just spent 3 days with, talking about what CTE has done to his life and how he now only has a short time to live thanks to leukemia. This man, who'd been told he had the frontal lobe of a 75-year-old, told me stories about myself that I can't recollect. My time at Brown and much of my life a messy blur. I tell myself to get over it. I'm making this into something bigger than it needs to be. I haven't had nearly the head trauma the NFL players have had. Except for excessive caffeine and cannabis use, I've led a healthy lifestyle over the last decade, and if my brain was deteriorating, surely I'd be aware of it. But I can't deny that feeling's back. The one I've kept at bay through yoga, jiu-jitsu, cognitive therapy, meditation, cold therapy, alcohol, and psychedelics. That feeling I've had since I was 10, if not younger, that I don't give a fuck and long to destroy something. The mixture of rage and depression doesn't compute. It used to for that explosive child, the troubled teenager, the failed fighter, the loser who never did a damn thing with his degree. But that's another life. I now have a beautiful life with a wonderful wife and 2 incredible children. We're set financially and everyone's healthy. I have close friends, a good support system, and publishing books at a proficient rate, and I found a balance between family and writing. My volcano's warmed up, so I turn it on, fill the bag with THC, breathe it in, load up another one because holy shit, I want this feeling to go away. But I stick with it, not willing to be a coward. Perhaps I lucked out and am blessed with a super resilient brain, all those concussions and knockouts not having any lasting effect. Anyone that's read my fiction knows I'm a doom and gloom kind of guy, so maybe I'm just hardwired to focus on the negative. And even if I did have traumatic brain injuries or CTE, surely I don't any longer. But still, I must consider the symptoms. Impulsive behavior. Guilty. Whether gambling, video games, or drugs, I can be an addict. Short-term memory loss. This one's not even funny. I can't tell you the number of times friends have shown me photos of events to prove that I was there. I blame it on the weed. Difficulty planning and carrying out tasks. My wife is a lawyer. Just thinking of her daily tasks shuts me down. It takes me days to respond to emails. The littlest things are written down in hopes I'll one day do them. Substance abuse. 31 years of cannabis and counting, along with plenty of experimentation. Emotional instability. It's not all the time. Usually I'm a fairly happy, even sweet guy, but it doesn't take a whole lot to rock the ship. One crappy night of sleep and my emotions are all over the place. I don't do well with confrontation. Depression or apathy. I never would have considered myself depressed until a year ago, but that's just due to the stigma behind the word. There's no denying that's what I'm currently feeling, and it's fucking strong. Suicidal thoughts or behavior. I struggled with this most of my life, spending too many of my college nights considering it with a gun in my mouth. It's not something I would ever do now that I have kids, and the urge has been dormant for the past decade, but even a trace of that self-destructiveness is something I must be aware of. So whether it's from a TBI, CTE, substance abuse, childhood scars, or good old genetics, there's definitely something wrong with me. But it's all good. I'm gonna fix it. I have to. So that's it. That's kind of where, if nothing else, that's where I'm starting this project from. This is kind of the motivator. It's all these, I committed to this project because of all the messages I got from friends, whether they played football or fighters, guys that have brain injuries. I never really want to take a look at it. Don't want to be writing. I'd much rather be doing something else. But I do believe it is going to be well worth my time. And I'm already in such a better place, so it's obviously worth it. So what else? I've also, part of it that sucks is been doing a lot of reading of nonfiction. I'd much rather read fiction. I don't really have time for that either. But I've been doing a lot of nonfiction. Here's some of the books I have. Let's see. Head Games. Christopher Nowinski. He played football at Harvard, then went on to the WWE and had some really bad concussions. Him finding out about concussions made him this huge proponent of it. He actually co-founded the Concussion Legacy Foundation. I might have screwed up those words, but he's done incredible work, so that's a cool book. I'm reading that right now. No, this one doesn't really count. The Male Brain. I read that before. The Female Brain. The Brain That Changes Itself. This book is awesome. If you know anyone that has had brain damage, the old thinking had been that you cannot repair your brain. For so long, that was the conventional thinking. Now we realize the neuroplasticity. The brain can change. I've never read a chicken soup book in my life, but I got this one. Recovering from Traumatic Brain Injuries. 100 Stories of Hope and other shit. Healing and Hard Work. What do we got? Awesome book. Incredible book. This actually changed the way that I think about sleep. It's Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Definitely recommend that. I used to be one of those guys that would say, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I did that my whole life. I worked graveyard shifts so I could train in the morning. Put the kids to bed at 9 o'clock, and then I would write until about 2 in the morning, wake up at 6. So all my life I've been deprived of sleep. And actually, now that I just did my brain mapping, I'll go into this deeper next week, but it shows that I've been super deficient in all my deep sleep. My delta waves just aren't firing the way they should. Haven't read this one yet, but it's on my list. Unstuck, Your Guide to the 7-Stage Journey Out of Depression. Woohoo! Another one we got. I've mentioned this one quite a few times. The Anatomy of Violence. I am rereading it, trying to understand how I got so messed up and twisted, and super interesting. Definitely makes me think a lot about myself and things I have done. How I'm lucky to be alive and not in prison. And I have not read this one yet, but it was recommended by Dr. Licata, who is my doctor at Vital Head and Spine. It is Aware, the Science and Practice of Presence, the groundbreaking meditation practice. And the last book for today is Motherfucking Twisted Reunion. Yeah. Been getting a lot of cool reviews on this book. I get some shitty ones too, but it's all right. I'll let those slide. As long as you guys enjoy it. This one, I've been sharing stories from this in 25 Perfect Days, but yeah, today we're going to go with one from here. The one we'll go with is Wrong Side Tavern. This is a favorite, oftentimes in reviews, this will be listed as one of the favorite stories in it. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it. All right, I will try to be back next week. Got a lot of appointments and shit to do, but I will definitely make this I don't want to say priority, but I got it on my to-do list. So if I'm not back next week, the following week I'll definitely be back. All right, guys, hope you have an incredible week, and I will talk to you later. Peace.
Wrong Side Tavern. Paulson logged off the computer and shut down the Amtrak's controls. What Hank would have been doing if it hadn't been for that damn van. The grisly accident outside San Diego had delayed his run by more than 2 hours. Overtime was always a pleasant addition to his engineer's salary, but the long day had taken its toll on him, and he was ready to get home. Hank waited until all the passengers were gone before he stepped off the train. A few of his porters nodded their good nights, and Hank headed for the escalator instead of the employee parking lot. His truck was in the shop, and he lived within walking distance of the station. It would have been easy to grab a cab, but Hank wasn't in a hurry now that he was off the train. Plus, he could use the exercise, and with any luck, the midnight air would clear his mind. The wreck was still heavy in his thoughts, the woman's head poking through the windshield. It had been the van's fault. It had slammed right into her Camry and knocked her car through the crossing gates. Hank couldn't have stopped in time. Hank looked up and down the block, not quite sure which way to go. He'd never used the pedestrian exit, or actually walked home. The blinking yellow traffic light, barely visible through the fog, had to be First Street. All he had to do was cross the tracks, go left at the light, and then walk another 6 or 7 blocks. He'd be home in half an hour. 3 teenagers wearing blue bandanas were hanging out at the corner. Hank didn't know if he should nod, make eye contact with them, greet them, or just keep his eyes down. They kept staring at him, letting him know he had no business being on their street. Hank opted for studying the sidewalk and the broken glass before turning left at the corner, his hard soles clicking on the concrete. His footfalls weren't the only ones, though. The teenager's footsteps echoed close behind him. Hank walked a bit faster, fighting the temptation to turn around and ask why they were following him. Did he disrespect them by not looking at them, or was he simply an easy target? Why the hell hadn't he called a cab? They matched his speed. Hank crossed the deserted street, didn't bother to look both ways. 2 sets of footsteps crossed with him. The third thug stayed on the other side, walked directly across from Hank, who could see him out of the corner of his eye. Hank took both hands out of his pockets in case he had to defend himself, and accelerated his stride. He flinched when one of the guys behind him cleared his throat.
Man, I just love this speed-walking shit. Great way to stay in shape, huh, dudes?
Nah, player. It just gets me all sweaty, said the other in a deep voice.
When I get sweaty, I get pissed.
The intimidation tactic was working, but Hank wasn't about to give up his wallet just yet. Despite his pounding chest and burning legs, Hank kept up the pace. He searched both sides of the street for any sign of life, tried to remember passing any gas stations or liquor stores whenever he drove through this run-down stretch of town. Whether it was his nerves or Deuce and his partner talking behind him, Hank couldn't recall anything being open this late. The only lights ahead of him were traffic signals. If Hank tried to run, he'd guarantee a beating, or maybe worse. He only had $100 or so in his wallet, which he would gladly part with if they would leave him alone. But now that he'd led them this far, Hank didn't think they'd just walk away. A small neon sign flickered up ahead. Wrong Side Tavern. Hank had never noticed it before. Below the sign was a flashing arrow pointing down the alley. Hank figured he could call a taxi or cops from inside the establishment if he could make it to the entrance.
Hey, where you headed, white boy? Deuce called. You don't want to head down there.
Hank kept walking, prayed he hadn't just made a terrible mistake and trapped himself in a dead end. Another glow was coming from halfway down the dark alley. Not caring what the thugs thought of him, Hank took off running toward the flashing neon. The sound of his slapping shoes and thundering heart blocked out all other noise as Hank raced past dumpsters and inky puddles. His lungs were on fire when he reached the entrance. Hank grabbed hold of the handle and yanked the door open. Much lighter than it looked, it flew open and out of his hand, banged against the wall. Hank caught the door on the rebound and slammed it shut behind him. Gripping the handle, he braced for a tug of war, but no one tried to pull back. There weren't any noises in the alley either, but people in the bar were talking, probably wondering what kind of drug he was tripping on. Hank let go of the handle and headed for the counter, accidentally bumped a man on crutches. The man, missing a leg, continued toward the back of the dimly lit bar. Mumbled something about Hank needing to watch where he was going. Hank walked toward the bar, unable to remember ever being in a place so grim and depressing. Still, it was better than being mugged or even killed. He studied the empty tables with their dingy white tablecloths. The joint wasn't dirty, but it had a bad feel to it, unlike any other dive bar he'd been inside. The patrons slouching in the booths that lined both walls weren't here to watch a game or pick up chicks. Their dejected faces told him they came to this bar for one reason: to forget. "Would you mind calling me a cab?" Hank asked the burly bartender with thick glasses. His right arm was missing just below the shoulder. Hank didn't mean to flinch.
"Well, that was quick. What is it?"
The bartender sniffed at his armpit.
"Do I offend?"
"Oh, no." Hank looked at the grimy window, unable to see anything in the alley. "I just had one hell of a day." The bartender said he understood and picked up the phone.
"One at the wrong side."
After a pause, he thanked them and hung up.
"They're on their way. Care for a drink while you're waiting?"
Although he promised himself he was done with that, at least on a work night, Hank said,
"Oh, why the hell not? Give me that stout."
He had a lot on his mind. The thugs outside, the paperwork he'd have to face in the following weeks, even though he couldn't have avoided the wreck. If anyone in the bar deserved a drink, it was him. Hank took a seat on the stool and noticed that a track ran the length of the counter. He pointed to the rails and asked,
"So, who's on the wrong side, you or me?"
Only having one arm didn't slow the bartender. He set the mug between two rail ties and sent it sliding to Hank.
"I'm afraid it's everyone who sets foot in this place."
Hank raised his drink and took a long swig. "That's not very uplifting."
"Yeah, but it's a catchy name, don't you think?"
Hank nodded and took another drink, tried to sound nonchalant when he asked, "Is there a back door to this place, maybe somewhere else the cab can pick me up?"
"No, there's no back door."
He motioned toward the entrance with his stump.
"That's the only way in or out. Why do you ask?"
I'd hate for the cabbies not to find this place."
"No worries. They'll come down the alley and right up to the door."
The man scratched his stumbly black beard and studied Hank, the hint of a smile on his lips.
"Let me guess. Someone follow you?"
"Yeah."
3 black guys."
How'd you know?"
"If they keep scaring people into here, I'm going to have to start tipping them. You're lucky, though. I've heard about a couple of people who didn't make it in here." I won't say it was them for sure, but it wasn't pretty. And Deuce is known to be good with his blade.
Hank tried not to look at the stump.
They ever mess with you?
No one ever messes with us. That's why we like this place. It's almost like we don't exist.
Hank looked around the sparsely populated bar. I don't mean to be rude, but isn't part of running a bar wanting people to come in? Attract more business? The thing is, ever since my accident, money hasn't meant a thing to me.
Well, that must be nice. Hank finished his beer and checked his watch.
Did they happen to say how long it would be?
Well, they always say 20 minutes.
Are they ever on time?
Might as well make yourself comfortable. Looks like you could use another drink.
Hank set his empty glass between the rails and slid it toward the bartender. It tipped over and shattered against the tie.
"Aw, shit, I'm sorry," Hank said.
The already quiet bar was now completely silent. He tried to help pick up the large pieces of glass, but the bartender waved him off.
"Don't sweat it."
The bartender held up a fresh mug and asked, "Another one?" Hank nodded, and the man filled the mug, set it between the rail ties, and slid it across the counter. Hank picked up his drink.
"You make it look so easy. I didn't think I threw it that hard."
The bartender leaned forward and whispered,
"Glass gotta be full."
Hank emptied his second round in 3 healthy gulps and handed it back.
Maybe one more."
The bartender poured another glass.
"Hell of a day, huh?"
"Hell of a year is more like it."
"Work?"
Hank nodded, tried to block the images from earlier in the day. The bartender slid the mug over.
"What you do?"
"I'm an engineer."
What kind? Mechanical?"
Actually, I'm a train operator."
"Dude, it was a joke. Take a look around."
He pointed out the railroad signs plastered on the walls, the crossing signal next to the bathrooms, the various train paintings hanging from thick iron spikes jammed into the walls.
"I know what an engineer is."
"I'm sorry. My head's somewhere else." Hank took another drink. The bartender told him not to worry about it, and then excused himself to serve the wino in a wool hat at the far end of the bar. Hank looked at the large painting above the shelves of booze. He shuddered and set down his drink, afraid he might drop it. What kind of sick bastard would think the depiction of a train derailment was appropriate to display anywhere, especially in a place like this? Body parts scattered on the ground, some lying underneath the overturned engine car. Hank closed his eyes to block it out, but the death and destruction from the painting evoked images from today's accident, swirled together in a crimson collage. It didn't matter if the thugs were outside waiting for him. Hank slid off his stool, threw a 20 on the counter, and turned for the door. A beautiful brunette sat at the nearest table, her bright red blouse and matching beret a sharp contrast to the white tablecloth. Hank turned back to the bar, scooped up his money, and downed the rest of his beer. When the bartender returned, Hank asked who the woman was.
"She's in here by herself, if that's what you're asking."
"No, she just looks familiar."
"None of my business who you know."
He polished a glass trapped between the counter and his waist.
"Why don't you go talk to her?"
Hank stole a glance at the woman and then asked for a whiskey. He promised himself he'd stop after this one. Hell, the taxi would probably show up before he even had time to finish. You wouldn't happen to know what she drinks, would you?"
"Can't say I've ever seen her in here before. That'd be a question for her."
"That's fine. Give me a screwdriver, another whiskey, and a water."
"You're the boss."
Hank balanced all 4 drinks in his hand and approached the table. She was so beautiful, her eyes so blue. Hank stumbled on his pickup line.
"One thing I can't handle seeing is a woman in need of anything, and I noticed you were without a drink."
In a melodic voice, she said, "Thank you for noticing, but I don't drink."
"The good news is that I do. These 3 are for me."
Hank set down the alcoholic beverages.
"The water is for you, though."
Her smile almost made the horrible day bearable. "That's thoughtful of you."
"Mind if I sit?" Hank asked.
I didn't think you'd want to." Now it was Hank's turn to smile, although he got the feeling he was missing something. As he sank into the chair, his legs disappeared beneath the long tablecloth. The woman didn't touch her water, but Hank started on his whiskey and asked, "So what in the world are you doing in a place like this?" She adjusted her beret and said, "I don't know. I was on the 415 and then something told me to come here." Hank wondered if he'd heard correctly. "The 415? That's the one. Why?" "I just can't believe I didn't notice you." "Did you take it too?" Actually, I operated." "No fooling?" Not wanting to appear conceited, Hank said, "It's really no big deal. The thing practically runs itself." When he asked, the woman said her name was June. She patted the back of his hand. "I'm sure you're just being modest. You have so much responsibility." I suppose it does take its toll." Hank finished his drink, set it down. "How do you mean?" Hank pulled over the screwdriver but didn't take a drink. No need for her to suspect he was an alcoholic. Cranking up the emotion like a sad insurance commercial, he said, "Sometimes bad things happen, but you just have to deal with it and go on." "What happened, Hank?" She gave his hand a light squeeze. "Did something happen today?" Hank let out a long sigh, nodded, and gulped down half the screwdriver. "What? An accident? Was it an accident?" "Yeah. Some van plowed into a woman stopped at the crossing and caused me to hit her too." "What was he doing?" "He was probably high, or just stupid, maybe texting. They'll find out in the autopsy." June took his hand in both of hers. "How can you stand it?" "The funny thing is that I don't feel that bad. This one wasn't my fault. I braked. Hard. Almost all of them couldn't have been avoided." "You've hit others?" "There are over 1,000 deaths a year on the rails, and I'm afraid I've got 8 of those." "And you haven't quit?" Hank finished the screwdriver. "That's what I was saying. The people I've hit don't bother me that much. Most of them are just strung out on drugs and want to die. Instead of suicide by cop, it's suicide by train. A decent person will just slit their wrists or pop some pills, stay indoors. Why mess up everyone else's day?" "That is pretty selfish." "Why do you think so many trains are delayed and canceled?" "Well, I've never thought of it like that." Hank took a swig of the second whiskey. "I feel worse about the animals. When I honk, they usually either freeze in fear or run directly down the tracks. I mean, imagine that. Imagine seeing someone's poodle sprinting for its life, knowing you can't do a thing to stop the tons of metal bearing down on it." June shook her head. "That's awful." Hank wiped his hand on his pants and smoothed the wrinkles. "Would you mind if we talked about something else?" Of course not. I'm so sorry." Hank smiled at her and told her not to be silly. "So, what about you? Is there a lucky guy waiting for you somewhere?" June shook her head so hard her hat nearly came off. No one wants me." "Are you serious?" June cast her eyes down. I don't have a lot to offer." "Don't say that. You're beautiful. That's something." June looked up, tears welling in her eyes. "I know what I am." "You're talking crazy." Hank got up from the table and said, "I'm going to get you a drink." At the bar, while Hank was clearing his tab, a loud squeaking came from the rear of the bar. An elderly man pulled a rusty red wagon toward the bathroom. It was hard to see him in the dim light, but it looked like he was carrying a pile of dirty clothes. "Here you go." The bartender handed Hank his change and said, It's just Jimmy. He's harmless." Hank carried 2 drinks back to the table. He took his seat and placed a bright green cocktail in front of June. I can't, really." She pushed it away from her. Hank took hold of her hands. "Just try it. It's a Midori sour, almost no alcohol in it." "I'm such a lightweight, Hank, and this stuff will run right through me." "You need it. We both need it." He eyed his whiskey and said, "Come on, beautiful. What do you say?" June sighed and stopped pushing away the drink. I guess one won't kill me. That's more like it. Hank casually slipped his leg under the table, sticking it out to see how she'd react. If she pushed back against his foot, they'd be back in his bedroom within the hour. If she played it cool and moved away, it could take a date, maybe even a dinner or two. He was still blindly searching for her leg when the squeaking started again. What's with this place? Hank sat up, the mood ruined. What, they give discounts to cripples and crazies? June threw her head back in laughter. It was so loud it was almost terrifying. Not knowing what else to do, Hank asked, "Look, are we going to do this or not?" He held up his glass for a toast, mildly surprised when she joined him. He finished his whiskey and noticed a steady, dripping sound. It was coming from under the table. June set down her empty glass and asked Hank if he was okay. "I think I must have spilled something." "I'm sorry. It was probably me. I can be so clumsy sometimes." She licked her lips. "Would you mind looking for me?" Hank lifted the tablecloth and stuck his head under the table. A puddle of bright green liquid pooled around the legs of her chair. He was about to warn her to move her feet out of the way so they wouldn't get wet, when he realized she didn't have any. The green liquid dribbled out of June's exposed intestines and dangled a few inches below the ragged edge of her severed torso. Hank bolted upright, the back of his head slamming into the table, his mind filled with darkness. June's icy hands shocked him back into reality. She held both of his wrists, smiled as if nothing was wrong. "I told you, it runs right through me. At least since this afternoon." "Let go of me!" Hank tried to pull his arms free and get up from the table. "At least since this afternoon." Wait. He did know her. She was the woman from today. "Where are you going, Hank?" June squeezed his wrists, his tendons and bones grinding together painfully. Hank shouted for help, looked around the room, anywhere but at June, that beautiful face he'd seen sticking through the windshield. June wouldn't let go of him, even as he continued to back away. Her torso slid across the table, leaving a bloody trail as she knocked over their empty glasses. June's hat fell to the side, revealed her crushed skull that looked as if someone had hammered away at it with a brick. The skull he'd seen poking through the glass. But he hadn't done that. The van had hit her. It had run the flashing lights, slammed into her. Or had it? No. The woman had been stalled out on the tracks. Hank had seen her before the van came barreling at her. The van had been trying to help. Hank hadn't been able to hit the brakes in time. June crashed to the ground, brought the table down with her. Hank ripped his hands free, backed into the counter, and spun around. He yelled to the bartender, "Call the cops! Call someone!" The bartender smiled and scratched at his beard. And why would I do that?" June dragged herself toward him on her elbows. Hank screamed, "Look at her!" "But you said I was beautiful," she wailed. The squeaking of the wagon made Hank freeze. The old man pulled the rusty red thing to the front door, dropped the handle. "To hell with you!" Hank shouted at June, to the bartender, to the patrons oozing out of their booths. He ran to the wagon and kicked the back of it, the pile of rags in the back falling out and somehow tangling around his legs. The rags were heavy, anchoring Hank to the floor. He tried to kick them off, but both of his legs were pinned. He looked down and saw a mixture of flesh and cloth, the raw meat nearly indistinguishable from the mangled jeans the woman had been wearing earlier today. Hank pulled on the door, but it wouldn't open. June kept calling him honey, creeping closer. The bartender whistled, tossed a sharpened rail spike in the air as he made his way over. The forms of disfigured patrons advanced upon the entrance that would never be an exit.